I am thrilled to share with you my interview with my great friend, the always interesting David Greenwalt, showrunner, creator, writer, producer extraordinaire, the creative talent who was instrumental in bringing us Buffy, Angel, Grimm, and so much more. Well, I am so excited that you are here today. I cannot wait to talk with you, David. Should we jump right in?
We should. I'm so thrilled to see and hear and talk to you, too. We've got a great history, you and I.
We sure do.
A big talent and a medium talent. They can figure out who's who.
I think it's an extraordinary talent and
A giant talent.
well, I don't know.
I know. I know. Okay.
So
Shoot away. Fire away.
let's go back to the beginning. You were born in Los Angeles, is that right?
Yes, I was. Absolute middle class. I call it Lower Westwood because we weren't North or Wilshire or Sunset. Just a very middle class upbringing. But I always wanted more. I always wanted to be north of Sunset. And I always wanted to be a writer. There's nobody in my family who is in this entertainment business.
At all. Nobody.
Not at all. But my father ran a couple of small hotels in Beverly Hills. It created an odd connection with Jules Stein,
Wow.
who was basically the founder of Decca Records, Universal Studios,
Yeah.
MCA, their creative agency. And when they went to antitrust, they broke all that up. But Stein was looking at his window on Crescent Avenue, and he didn't like the hotel, and he bought it, and my father ran it. And for some reason, Stein took a liking, Jules Stein, also Jules Stein Eye Institute, quite a wonderful thing. He took a liking to my father. My dad could go to Universal anytime. He wouldn't know Fred Astaire from Sylvester Stallone. So that was a tiny window. And I ended up working in the Universal mailroom in the summer of 1968.
Oh, wow. How old were you?
18. And that was interesting because while I had this idea of a writer or possibly a performer in the back of my mind, the writers were my favorite place to deliver the mail. Their little cottages on the old lot. And they usually had their feet up and were drinking until contract time was coming. And then they got very busy. But I thought that's an interesting place maybe to be. And it was some few years later when I started writing seriously.
And do you have siblings?
I do. I had an older brother and I have an older sister. And really, my brother, sister, and mother are all very frugal. My dad was a little more gregarious and generous, which is more my thing. He passed away a long time ago, but they did a good job. Took me a few years to realize what a good job they did.
Scooby-Doo, did you replace my painting with this super cool print of the Ennis house? It's not the Ennis house. It's Angelus's mansion, my home for a while. Suited me well. Who gave it to you? Drawn with knives. Is that one of your funny asides? No, silly Billy. It's from Jennifer, my friend at Drawn with Knives. Why is it called that? She draws all of her artwork with a knife. It is dark and beautiful magic. She's a new sponsor. So the Angel Mansion print comes in either 5x7 or 11x15. Go to drawnwithknives.com. Well done, Drew. Not only am I a polydimensional superstar of entertainment, I'm now a titan of business too. What was it about writing, besides seeing them and drinking with their feet up and all that, but was it the romance of the idea, or what was it that initially was the bug that bit you?
Great question. I knew from a very young age I wanted to be a writer, and I knew that was a blessing because so many people, they don't know what they want to be. In the 20s is a great time or some schools to explore all that. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and it made all schoolwork from earliest stages through college easier unless it was chemistry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because social studies, history, English, and I also had for the humorous, and I was all around different colleges. In my last college, I wrote a term paper, but also had humor, and the professor was reading it to all his colleagues. And that was kind of like showbiz for me. I took an English class where really we're supposed to read all the great novels. I skimmed Moby Dick. I did read Crime and Punishment. Well, I loved The Godfather. I loved Kurt Vonnegut. And there was a writer named Richard Brodigan who was very well known then out of San Francisco. People don't remember him now. And a few years later, I would meet Richard Brodigan along with another great writer named Thomas McGuane, who wrote a lot of books and a couple of movies. And Brodigan never ever drew a sober breath and had kind of a sad ending. But meeting these guys, it was like, as a man, you need to see stuff modeled. And I was like, oh, I could probably do this. And I didn't know what it was going to be. Eventually, it started out to be movies. I started writing movies around then.
And what was expected of you by your family?
Well, I was very blessed because my father died at 59, but my mother lived to 98, was a wonderful woman, kind, very funny, fierce spiritual regimen, just her private way. And she always said, do what makes you happy. And she always encouraged my writing. And during my 20s, I had all these other crummy but kind of interesting jobs, but real low class jobs. But I was always writing, and she helped me in my 20s. Every once in a while, she had to pay a couple of huge bills I'd run up. And from 30, when I began making money, pretty much the rest of her life, every time I saw her, I handed her $100 bill.
Aw.
It made me very happy to do that. She took me to the library very young age. I read a lot of books as a kid. She encouraged that. And she was a huge movie fan. So I saw all the movies from the 30s and 40s, all those wonderful movies. So that too was in my brain. And the idea of snappy dialogue came early.
Before we go to some later years, in terms of high school, how did you meet and become best friends with Jeff Bridges?
I had gone to a very small Christian school from 4th through 9th grade, literally 24 people in our class.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much the same people all those years. So they're my archetypes whenever I'm thinking of a character. I'd go from there to University High School in about 1965, 3,000 people. It was incredibly diverse at that time because there was from Bel Air down to Venice. So you had wealthy, you had middle class people, and you had cholos and stuff. You had 1/3 white, 1/3 Hispanic, and you had 1/3 Asian, but there were very few black faces. But there was a counselor who came, and his name was Mr. Williams, then 32 to my 17. And I knew Jeff in high school, and we kind of nodded, but I wouldn't say we were friends. And this counselor, Mr. Williams, who I've made a documentary on, today he's 92 to my 70-something, all 4 grandparents born in slavery. Just a remarkable man, number 10 of 11 children,
Wow.
Grew up on a farm in Texas, but they came to LA. This man's name is Caldwell Williams. And he pulled me aside he was a very popular counselor. And he pulled me aside one day and he said, you need to get some new friends. And I said, why? He said, because yours are going to die. So I was very big in the drug scene of the mid-late 60s. That was something I was really good at. And I was having a good time. There's an expression, the summer of love, that would have been 1967. In our case, it was maybe 4 or 5 weeks of love. And then bad things started happening to a lot of people. So this counselor, Mr. Williams, then introduced me to a sort of better grade of guys, of whom Jeff was one. We would have these sort of marathon retreats. And we went on one of these with Mr. Williams, myself, and say 8 of these young men. Jeff and I just clicked, and we became almost instantly best friends. And then neither one of us went to college straight out of high school. So for years, every night in his apartment, we played guitar, wrote songs, like every night.
Oh my gosh.
3 or 4 years, yeah. And then he went off, obviously, became so successful as an actor. And eventually I realized music is really not my forte, although there's a whole renaissance going on right now in that. And I started writing.
Wow. And you're still great friends to this day through all of
this amazing stuff. And Mr. Williams probably had a big help opening me up spiritually and emotionally. And then Jeff and my close friendship all these years. First of all, I met a whole bunch of people I wouldn't have met, like those writers I mentioned earlier. The world got a lot bigger, and I saw a lot of possibilities.
Sounds like Mr. Williams really changed the course of your whole path.
He certainly did. The documentary is called Mr. Williams, the World's Greatest Teacher, and we're just about to sell it. You'll be seeing it soon. With Jeff, we just had so many wonderful adventures and such good times. And he bought his first house. It was pretty early 20s. It was just a little house in the Malibu Hills, but it had a flat space down below. I bought a little Airstream trailer, I think for $1,100. And I lived on that piece of land for 2 years. And I wrote my first script.
Ah,
And I also stood in for Jeff on two movies. One of his early movies called Hearts of the West. So we would have been about 23, 24. And a couple of years later, Winter Kills, which is just a bizarre, bizarre movie. Winter Kills is one of Quentin Tarantino's favorite movies.
oh.
So about 24, I'm standing in for Jeff. I'm living in a trailer below.
I just want to say for our listeners that don't know what standing in means, it means for the talent, they will often light with someone else who is called a stand-in, who comes and they set everything up and then the actor comes in when they're actually shooting. So I just wanted to clarify for people that don't know what that is.
I love how you always do that. And you should come and explain to my wife when I'm leaving out most of what I'm saying. Yes. And the fun thing is, I mean, obviously the actor is the big deal, and you'll come in the morning, or they rehearse, and then the actor goes off to makeup and whatever. Then the stand-in is just a body so they can match the lighting and stuff. So there was a scene where he's supposed to run down and jump off a wall, right?
Right.
So every time I'm doing that, it's just pavement. And then when he's doing it, they put a mattress in
Oh
there.
my gosh.
But I was thinking I was getting about $40 or $50 a day, which was fantastic, and no heavy lifting. And I'd worked like construction, waiter, bellboy, busboy, boxboy, all very interesting jobs. And then that first day at MGM on that big set, the styrofoam cups and the smell of they had the beeswax smoke in those days. I just got a feeling I'm going to spend my life on these sets. And I was able to slowly learn a lot. And the other thing I learned pretty early on in the game was somebody is writing these words. And many people think the actors just make up the words, right? These are a blueprint. It's not the actual house, because it takes all of us, the actual writers, directors, actors, and all the wonderful crew and designers and costumers, etc. And that really encouraged me. And I actually wrote my first script during that time in my trailer, sometimes on the set.
And what was that script?
That script was called In the Sane Asylum, and it was really not bad for a first script. It was sort of about University High School, West Los Angeles in the 60s. And I was friends with some of the really tough Hispanics. I was friends with some of the rich people. There was lots of drugs and lots of romance, but I knew nothing about structure. But believe it or not, that script got a lot of attention. A famous producer and actor named Tony Bill was producing.
Oh, yes.
And there was a wonderful director, Ulu Grossbard, who had directed some wonderful movies, and they got interested in the script. And then it all fell apart, thank goodness, because money and success kills more or less than having to work your way up.
You weren't quite ready yet.
No, I wasn't. But I was off and running. Then there was some period in there where my father died. My mother was running one of those little hotels, and I was living in one of the rooms, still very early 20s. And I made myself sit at the desk 4 hours a day. I think I was allowed 2 cups of coffee and 4 cigarettes, or it could be the other way around. Sometimes I just sat there. And then I wrote maybe 2 or 3 more movie scripts that were really not good at all. And I knew they weren't good, but I said, I got to keep going, and the structure thing. And I was always pretty good with emotional dialogue. And then Dan Petrie Jr., who would eventually write Beverly Hills Cop,
Right.
had a poker game. And of course, his father, Dan Petrie Sr., raising in the sons. And like the Bridges family, this Petrie family, they were so kind and generous and so open. And Dan had this poker game, Dan Petrie Jr. We're still all in our 20s. And there were a couple of screenwriters, all these young people wanting to come up in the business. Now, Dan Petrie Jr. at that time was an assistant to a legendary international creative management ICM agent named Jack Gilardi.
Oh, yeah.
And Jack was an old Vegas school. He had been married to Annette Funicello. So Dan was trying to be an agent, but he was really an assistant, right, to Jack Gilardi. He had two clients, myself, based on my first script, and another young man named Jim Kauf.
Oh,
Yes, you might remember. And David Niven Jr. had optioned a book by Jeffrey Archer, who was a pretty big English writer, still is, I think, was called Shall We Tell the President? It was an American book, even though he's English. And David Niven Jr. had $5,000 for somebody to adapt this book. So Dan Peavy Jr. said to myself and Jim, we knew each other, he was a struggling screenwriter. I have two clients in one project. Why don't you guys
co-write?
Oh, right. And Jim and I did, and we adapted that, never got made. We did some other like really weird, crazy, The Lawnmower Killer. There were just strange little movies. But we worked 9 to 5, 5 days a week. Didn't go to lunch till we had 3 pages. This is the movie business, which writes a little slower than television. We called ourselves Mitsubishi of Hollywood. We just worked and worked and worked. And we eventually wrote a movie called Class that Rob Lowe and Jackie Bissett did.
Yep. And Andrew McCarthy, right?
And Andrew McCarthy. What a memory. Yes, Andrew McCarthy. Jackie was wonderful. I had known her through a boyfriend of hers.
I did too, by the way. I knew her through Alexander Goodenough, the dance.
Oh, Goodenough. I remember him.
They were together for a while.
A long time. And Victor Dre of Dre's Restaurant was before Goodenough.
Uh-huh.
She was fantastic. She liked to have 9 hours of sleep. She was just great. We'd come up with the idea for this movie, Class, and we knew we wanted to do a prep school story, rich kid, poor kid. They play pranks on each other, their relationship. And this has to do with breaking a story. This was a big lesson to me. So I remember, although Jim and I were fast and could write a script in a month or 6 weeks, the breaking of the story is so important. So I remember sitting for 3 weeks, actually at my tiny little house up in Laurel Canyon. We understood this poor kid comes and a rich kid, and they play these pranks, and it's what happens. And it was almost a joke. One of us said, well, what happens if the poor kid sleeps with the rich kid's mother, right? Boom. And then the design was Jonathan, the Andrew McCarthy character, who's just a disaster at dating, and Rob, who's very cool and suave. By the way, Rob at 18, a natural comedian, a natural dramatic actor, and of course, he's not bad looking. Jonathan, the character, goes into town. This all takes place in Chicago. He goes to Rush Street, but he's got a fake college ID. And he meets this beautiful woman, Jackie Bissett, and they end up starting to have this kind of torrid affair. And then at Christmas, Jonathan goes home with Rob, Skipper, Rob, and Jackie is the mother. And then all hell breaks loose. And we were going to pitch that to Paramount, but we had a meeting with a famous producer named Marty Rantahoff. And he's Sandpipers. He's done all these great big movies. And his development person, Kathleen Summers, and we had been pitching to Kathleen other ideas. She said, do you have anything else? We pitched her Class. They fell in love with it. They bought it, optioned it, and we were shooting in a month or 2.
Wow, lickety split. You said you learned a lesson about breaking a story. Was part of that the idea that just throw out any idea and see where it leads you? Or what was the lesson that you really learned there?
God, you are good. Geez, I want to work for you. Well, one lesson is there's no good ideas without a lot of ideas. So you do throw everything out. The other lesson is sometimes it takes a long time. We might spend 20 minutes on a line, but then we might write 3 or 4 pages in a couple hours. And actually, the real lesson of Class, and I'm glad you reminded me of this. So the poor kid is a genius. He had a perfect SAT, and he's on scholarship in this pretty high-class prep school. And there's a scene early in the show after they've had these pranks and they've kind of become friends. They're drinking in their dorm room, and the Rob Lowe character says, well, tell me the worst thing you've ever done, And Jonathan says, well, I cheated on the SATs. And he says, what? You're the smartest guy in the school. And he's like, yeah, but I couldn't take any risk. Right. And then Rob says, well, I killed a guy. And he tells the story how he killed a guy down in the tropics on some vacation. But then he's so reacting to Jonathan and he cheating. And Jonathan says, well, you killed a guy. And Rob says, oh, I know. I was just kidding. That didn't happen. Now, this is a character scene, right? However, the plot later on, Stuart Margulies, who used to play Angel on Rockford Files, he's an investigator and they know someone cheated on the SAT. Right. And Rob and Andrew McCarthy, they've come to such a crux in their relationship. and Rob could destroy him, and he doesn't. So the lesson is great writing should always feel like character and emotion, and every line should be plot, and you should never know it. Agatha Christie is the master of this. And an ashtray, a drink, everything is plot, but it all seems like character. That was the great lesson of that thing.
Wow. Hey, Drew, want to be in the wine business and own a piece of a vineyard? Vampire Vineyards? Well, actually, yes. They have been in the vampire wine business for over 30 years, and now Vampire.com is expanding and accepting investments from the public, so everyone can become an owner of Vampire Vineyards. Among their many awards and medals, in 2026, Vampire's Pinot Noir has received not just a gold medal, but it was named Best of Class by the Los Angeles Times Invitational Wine and Spirits Challenge. I've sipped the blood of the vine, and it's absolutely to die for. Also, who can say no to the Dracula's Red Blend? A commanding blend of bold red varietals with dark spice and a velvety finish, smooth enough to keep you lingering in the shadows. Shh. Someone's whisper. Psst, 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 psst. But this one whispers my name, Drusilla. You'll be happy to hear many of their bottles come clothed in cute little velvet and silk vampire capes, and some even rest in peace in a fantastic coffin-shaped box. Step into the cellar at Vampire.com to discover the full collection of vampire wines, spirits, and other dark delights. I do look rather fetching in a cape. Tell me more, simple minion. Not a minion. But for our listeners, I will tell more. The investment offering is open till April 30th. For more details, go to wefunder.com/vampirespirits to read all about the opportunity. Well, you know what I say? What? This is nothing to whine about. Hee hee. Did you ever want to be an actor? I know you talked about music.
Well, this is a very sad story. Going back till I'd say being 18 and in there, and my best friend is Joe Bridge, but he's not a giant movie star just yet. And there were so many of us in Los Angeles at that time. There was a famous acting school called The Loft that a lot of great people came out of. So I'd been to some acting school and stuff, and I had a feeling, and I'd done a play. And then I went to London, and I was living in Earl's Court, which was then all Aussies, and you could live cheaply in London. You know London very well. I went to a pub, and as the English pubs, there's nothing like them. And I got talking and drinking with a fellow and telling him my interest in theater. And he said, you should meet Lindsay Anderson, my friend who's a director now. Lindsay Anderson was a very important movie and theater director. Lindsay Anderson directed Malcolm McDowell's first movie called If, before Clockwork Orange, and he was mounting a play in the West End called The Contractor. And the play was basically, it was quite interesting visually, putting up a giant tent for a wedding that's coming. And you get to meet all the workers, and there's all this drama. So I got a job during early rehearsals as a stagehand, all under the table, and I don't think I was even paid. And I'd been on enough sets, even as a stand-in or a lowly person in these acting schools, like, this is what it's supposed to be. You know, a really bad actor will say, well, I would never do something like that. A really good actor like Jeff Bridges or you will say, how do I find the part of me that is the killer, that it is whatever? So that kind of changed my life on how I thought about acting and storytelling.
But you didn't want to act.
I did kind of want to act, but I wasn't very good. And I even had an agent for a while. And I went on some auditions. Jeff even did an audition with me once where he and his brother Bo had this great trick. They had a thing from Catcher in the Rye, but when you're first sitting there, you just start talking to the person. They don't realize you're already in the scene. It was a neat little trick. Anyway, I never got a part, never got hired. And of course, I focused on my writing, and then he took off like, Last Picture Show. I mean, a guy who just got, I'm 21 years old, and was always a lovely guy. We are still friends with all our high school guys 57 years later. He's met and worked with everybody in the world. They all love him, rightly so. And he's a very special person and a very unique actor. Yeah.
It was fun watching you guys interact at your wedding in terms of the shorthand that you have in your relationship. But it also sounds like in your life, you have had a serendipity, for lack of a better word, in terms of meeting just the right person at the right moment that sets you on this adventure, whatever adventure it may be, from the high school counselor to Dan Petrie to meeting for this play in England at a pub. That sounds like that's been a big part of your life.
I've had a spectacular life with small dark afternoons of the soul. And yes, you just said it so well. I was thinking too about our interview today. You look at a person, much later part of their career, and it seems like it was all kind of, they did this, they did that, but it is so much more serendipitous and chaotic. And there's quite a bit of good fortune, but you have to be ready when the good fortune comes around. But nothing is written in stone, and nobody knows a thing. Not the Pope, not anybody who ever ran a movie or TV studio. They're no more smart than that guy taking his pants off on the corner.
Yep.
And not knowing is kind of a great thing, and it's a space for creativity.
Mm-hmm. But you also always had an incredible work ethic. You've described you and Jim writing for 9 hours a day, and prior to that, you sitting in a room for 4 hours a day and having the discipline to know, okay, these 2 scripts weren't as good by your estimation as your first one, but that discipline of doing it and building your craft was important to you.
Those are really important values, and they were my middle-class values. Being put with Jim Kauf was great because Terry Garr, God bless her, she called Jim the Burbank Dutch, and he was from real middle-class Burbank thing. And Terry Garr appeared in a movie that Jim wrote and directed called Miracles that never quite got released.
Oh.
She was just a doll. And because Jim had done that, after class, we wrote a movie called Secret Admirer, originally designed for Gene Wilder and Gilda Radner. We spent 3 weeks with them in Connecticut. And it's a Cyrano de Bergerac idea. And in the end, Gene said, oh, Gilda would never do that for me. So we revamped it, turned it into a high school movie called Secret Admirer. Tommy Howe, Kelly Preston, rest in peace. It had a nice little cast. And I got to direct that movie because he had written and directed this movie, Miracle. So this is very, very early 80s. So I had my director's debut. Now, going back a little to being a stand-in, I also worked as an extra, which is people in the background. I observed that many directors do not seem to know story. They seem to know I send to New York for 50 jackets, 20 eyeglasses for a person. I knew I didn't know lenses and camera. And there's this really funny thing called crossing the line in television and movies. It kind of blew Orson Welles' mind one time. He had to go home for a day when he was starting to. But I believed, somewhat arrogantly, that I knew story. So when I directed Secret Admirer, I had so much help from everybody, and I never pretended I knew stuff I didn't, but I knew story. Although it was the end of those teen movies, Orion mistakenly thought, this is our big hit this summer. And it tested really well. It did okay. It made its money back, but it was sort of the end of those teen, sort of sexy, sort of romantic movies. That created some heat for me. And then Jim and I wrote another movie called American Dreamer, which is not that well known, but it's a great story. And CBS Films, which I think maybe made this film and no others, they had a script, and it was a great idea, but it needed work. So Jim and I were interviewed to something. You have to remember, we got $5,000 for our first thing. Sometimes nothing. Then we got $12,000, right? Then one time, and this is before cell phones, so we were up camping in Bishop, Northern California. He goes in this project. It was called Sobrage, who was this rather well-known serial killer all throughout Asia. And they made a show some few years ago, but this is way back when. So Jim comes back, because he had to go in town to call. He says, well, we're getting $12,000. I couldn't believe it. I could live for 18 months. He says, each. It was unbelievable, that amount of money.
Did you guys jump up and down?
Oh my God. I not only did I jumped up and down so much, I popped a muscle in my calf. And
Oh my gosh.
So then this American Dreamer thing comes, and there's a lot of time constraint. And he tells them the amount of money we're going to need. And I was outside and said, I can't believe you did that. It was like 35,000. That's a lot of money for us. And they said yes. And it needed to be written so quick. We sat in the same room and we learned something that never changed in 47 years, which is we sit in the same room, talk, what's the scene, talk the dialogue. And it's not enough that, oh, I hear a line in my head. I have to convince you it's a great line. I have to convince you the structure is great. And we never looked back, although we both became directors, because let's say we were a little less than overwhelmed with pleasure by some directors had done to our movies.
Yeah.
And then that spread our careers a little bit. And Jim went on, oh my gosh. National Treasure he wrote. The first Rush Hour he wrote. A great movie, Stakeout, he wrote. And I slipped into television eventually. I just hated the movie business so much.
Well, television really was the medium for writers.
It is, but in the early days, we screenwriters kind of looked down on TV, like it's not the really.
There was such a division, even for actors, the same thing. It was very different than now. It was you either did movies or you did television. There wasn't that ability to just go wherever the great stories were.
This is another reason I love the Brits. It's Hamlet at night and a tampon commercial in the day. There is no passport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, some of the reasons I hated the movie business was so unprofessional, and years go by and you wait and wait and wait. The television business is very professional, and whatever the notes and the casting, it's on air Tuesday night. Right?
It's immediate. There's immediate gratification.
And it's much more professional, much more challenging. And then the structure of a movie, it's basically a 3-act, it's a short story. It's almost like a 3-beat joke. Guy walks into a bar, ba, 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 punchline. And these television shows, those successful ones I did, we were doing 22 a year. We were doing 100, 130 episodes. That's a Proustian novels.
Right.
And to me, that's so much more fun and rewarding. And of course, as you mentioned, the most important thing, writer is king in television. And I understand the director is king in movies, because someone has to stay there for a whole year, et cetera, or more or less. And the good directors want the writer around, and they want the input, and they want to find it out. The bad ones, they want to pretend it all came out of their head. The famous Capra film, It's a Wonderful Life, it wasn't actually that big a hit, but it's a beloved movie. Everybody loves this movie. It was a wonderful movie, beautifully written and directed. And the writer of that walked into Capra's desk and dropped 110 pages of blank paper. He says, why don't you write one? Because Capra was taking all the credit. And we love this idea that there's some super all-knowing person. But what happened was I had a good run in the movie business. We had those 3 movies made. And Jim was off doing other things too. And I was rewriting and getting these deals, but never getting anything made. And then a friend of mine, Michael Dinner, who had directed a movie called Catholic Boys, was kind of similar, that we had each directed these little movies that had summers made. And he was helping to run the Wonder Years, the Fred Savage original Wonder Years. And he had me come in because he was going to talk to me about maybe directing. So I'm a movie guy. So I come into his office for an hour. Michael Dinner, I don't say a syllable, talks about how hard and unforgiving television is. It's just impossible. And then he offers me to direct. And I ended up directing 4 and writing 3 Wonder Years. And I fell in love with the medium, because it is immediate and professional. And you got to have it by a time. And yet, this thing I was talking about earlier, you might spend a half hour on a line. Still, it's got to be on the air Tuesday night.
Right.
And the other thing I love in television is you get your cut back and you've sent it to the studio and done your notes, whatever, but you realize there's something not right. I can reshoot a thing on Friday that is on the air Monday, Tuesday night. And the biggest example of this are those nutcakes who created and ran the X-Files. They were so down to the last minute that the show is on in New York, but it's not going to be on here for a few hours. They're still doing little fiddling stuff with the sound.
Oh.
And the X-Files raised the level of production extraordinarily. And before it was a hit, they reshot like crazy. So you had the X-Files, you had Buffy, and you had the West Wing. And that was a sort of a golden age of television.
One last movie question. Did you work with John Huston?
Well, it's a wonderful and a little personally embarrassing story. So Jeff did a movie with Candy Clark called Fat City.
Oh, yes.
Up in Stockton. This would be early 70s. And so Jeff is supposed to be a boxer, but he's not a great boxer. So they had him training like really hard. But every once in a while, he wouldn't run the 4 miles. And I said, well, you're not doing your thing. He says, oh, it's what my character would do. So John Huston, the great John Huston, was directing this movie. And I always visited him wherever he was shooting. I went up to Stockton there. And from what I observed, Huston had 2 directions. He'd get out of the chair and walk over to the actor. And one was even less, and the other was even more. And you as an actress know less is more. I once asked Jeff, what's the worst direction you ever got? He said, the director was standing right here, and he says, and don't do that thing with your mouth. Action.
Oh, wow.
That's a very special relationship. If an actor trusts a director, then they can bring and show and do. Now comes Winter Kills, where I'm standing in now. This is 1977, and John Huston is an actor in Winter Kills. And how Bill Richards put this together was so great. He went to Elizabeth Taylor and he said, I have John Huston and Anthony Perkins. And he went to Anthony Perkins and says, I have John Huston. He got this insanely cool cast. And it was a very strange but pretty cool movie. Anyway, John Huston was an actor, and he was on oxygen at that time. And I forgot he'd made A Man Who Would Be King, and I didn't love that movie. And when I saw it again, I loved it. There was a comment, and Jeff was like,
Stop.
I know my time is coming. Any insults ever given me, I earned that the hard way. And then the last thing.
Wait, one question. What did John Huston do when you disparaged?
I'm not sure he heard because we were all kind of walking to lunch.
Oh, good.
But I just always regretted that. But people make mistakes. People say things.
We're all human.
Yes, we all are human. It's very important to remember. So that's 1977. But I got to see him direct. I got to see him act. So now it's 1980, 81, and Calf and I have our first studio deal at Paramount Pictures, which was then run by Michael Eisner and Jeff Katzenberg, who would soon go and take over Disney. And they wisely started these writers' buildings like Old Hollywood. Jim and I were hired to write Airplane 3, and they were making Airplane 2. And of course, Airplane 1 is one of the great movies ever made. And we would watch screening rooms in those days. We watched old movies every day at lunch. Oh, now Airplane 2 didn't do well. They never made Airplane 3. But meanwhile, we wrote a script called Bigamy for Alan King, the great comedian, performer, and producer. And this is the old movie days. We spent a year on that script. We flew to Boston to watch open heart surgery because the character was a surgeon. Alan King drank 6 inches of Tanqueray every day at 5 p.m. Unless we were in L.A., then it was 2 p.m., smoked like a chimney, and was standing over your bed at 7 in the morning, hair comb ready to go. And the stories, obviously he knew and it's another thing I love in our business is the stories, Fondas and Gregory Peck and all the wonderful old Sinatra. I won't bore you with those stories, but we were in Boston, Jim and I, in a room, a hotel room, that happened to have a fireplace when we heard John Huston had died. And we picked up 2 crystal glasses and toasted and threw them in the fireplace. And supposedly, the last thing John Huston did in bed as he died, raised his hands in victory.
Oh, like died. Champion hands?
And if it ain't true, it ought to be. Yeah.
Oh,
if
it ought to be.
It ought to be.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Hey, Drew. This bar is so cool. And I love your tiki-inspired outfit. I do like to blend in when I'm on a secret mission. Here. Take these and put them in your bag. What? No. Wait, are these gems? These pieces are amazing. Ooh, I love this creature from the Black Lagoon handcrafted ceramic mug. Oh, and this King Kong watering spike is super cool. Oh my gosh, I also love this American Werewolf in London mug. The work is so detailed. As you know, these come from Moore Monsters. Jim Moore sent an email taunting me with these lovely, handmade, one-of-a-kind items. I must have them. Drew, that was my email. I've asked you 1,000,000 times not to read my emails. We don't need to steal these. Jim is advertising his Etsy page, More Monsters, on our podcast. Re-Vamptees get a special 20% discount. The code is MONSTERMUG, all caps, all one word.
Excuse me, ma'am. Could I see your bag?
Well, you see my friend here, Scooby-Drew. Scooby-Drew? Drusilla, where are you?
Follow me, ma'am.
But wait, it's my friend. She's obsessed with Jim Moore's work. She didn't realize it's for sale, but saw that you had it in your bar, and I explained everything to her.
Your friend?
Well, she thinks I'm her minion, but she seems to have disappeared.
Right.
Really? This has nothing to do with me.
Tell it to the judge.
Go to More Monsters Etsy page, Moore, and use the Re-Vamped special 20% discount code, MONSTERMUG. Prophet was such an interesting series. How did that come about?
Well, this is a good lesson if someone wants to do something creative.
To be continued.
Let's get ready to Buffy!
Vengeance Val was the victor in our first inaugural Battle of the Uber Buffy fans. If you would like to challenge her title and be considered as a contender for this season's battle, please email revampedpod@gmail.com. Yes, be sure to include your name, where you weigh in with your number of watch-throughs, where you're located, something interesting about you, or something you think would be good to share,
and your social media handles.
Yes, woohoo. Woohoo. Boop boop be drove. Re-Vamptees, please correspond with me on our Patreon page, Re-Vamped with Juliet Landau, on Twitter, @Juliet Landau, on Instagram, @Juliet_Landau, and on the Fans of Juliet Landau Facebook group, or Juliet Landau official Facebook page. Patreon peeps to be read in the credits: Dave Hall, Fonnie June Kendall, Daniel Harbour, Louise Brennan, Brandon Key, Cameron Burton, Donnie Ruskin, Madeline Pruitt, Marion Stevenson, Antonio H. Gutierrez, and Bobby Pelham. It makes all the difference because we cannot keep making the show without you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Until we meet again.
See you next time when we do it again. Do it again. Until then, rewatch, revamp, reinvent, and be remarkable you.